The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected. A new view of what led up to a fatal ICE shooting in Minnesota as fallout over the deadly encounter continues. Plus, a global power shift underway. The president's meeting with oil giants as attention turns to Venezuela's massive oil reserves. And Denmark and Greenland envoys at the White House. The talks underway as the Trump administration eyes the mineral-rich island territory. From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News. Now, we are glad you're here with us. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and on this weekend edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week, starting in Minnesota with Governor Tim Walz ending his re-election bid over an alleged welfare fraud scandal. The White House sending 2,000 federal agents into Minneapolis for an immigration crackdown operation. The next day, Minnesota lawmakers testified on Capitol Hill on fraud allegations, while a fatal ICE-involved shooting happened on the streets of Minneapolis. The FBI taking control of the investigation. And this weekend, anti-ICE demonstrations happening from coast to coast. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins explains how the investigation into that shooting is taking a new turn as we learn more about the victim.
Federal sources say Renee Good, the woman shot and killed by an ICE agent in Minneapolis this week, was involved in a, quote, ICE watch group that trained members to interfere with ICE monitoring and sometimes attempting to interfere with President Trump's nationwide illegal immigration crackdown.
You have a woman who is trying to obstruct a legitimate law enforcement operation. I can believe that her death is a tragedy while also recognizing that it's a tragedy of her own making and a tragedy of the far left who has marshaled an entire movement, a lunatic fringe against our law enforcement officers.
This picture of Good is in sharp contrast to those who knew her.
A neighbor who, is not a terrorist, not an extremist. That was just a mom who loved her kids, loved her spouse.
Critics supportive of Good insist the ICE agent was not in any danger and wasn't justified in firing at her.
Give me a break. No, he was not ran over. He walked out of there with a hop in his step.
Legal systems widely recognize vehicles as potential deadly weapons, with investigators looking at speed, direction, and intent to determine whether deadly force is justified.
You want to come at us? I say go get yourself some lunch, big boy.
In this incident, video from social media, including footage purportedly shot from the agent's phone, shows the SUV moving in the agent's direction before he fired. Investigators say all of these factors will be closely examined as part of the ongoing probe. The agent, identified as Jonathan Ross, was also previously dragged and injured last June during an attempted arrest, illustrating the risks the Trump administration says they face during operations.
Right now, immigration and customs enforcement officers are facing a 1,200% increase in assaults, a 3,200% increase in vehicle rammings, and an 8,000% increase in death threats.
In the wake of the shooting, the FBI is now investigating the funding of the protests. The New York Post reporting the parent organization of one group behind the protests, Indivisible Twin Cities, received millions of dollars in recent years from liberal billionaire George Soros's Open Society Foundation. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
In the aftermath of the fatal shooting in Minneapolis, the FBI has now taken over the investigation. Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension releasing a statement Thursday saying it would no longer be involved and won't have access to case materials. The National News Desk, Jeff Harris with those details.
Many legal experts are pointing to the video circulating of the fatal shooting, breaking down both tire rotation and vehicle positioning. Some saying Good was actually reversing and attempting to flee rather than hit the ICE agent, while others argue aiming a vehicle at a human is the same as aiming a gun. Now, we do want to warn you, the video you're about to see is graphic.
No!
From legal experts to law enforcement, eyes across the country are analyzing this video and sharing opinions about whether or not they believe an ICE agent was justified firing the deadly shot that killed Minneapolis mother Renee Good.
I mean, sometimes there's no time to get out of the way of these cars. In my mind, when I saw this, I immediately said justified shooting.
You have to use non-lethal tactics to detain them. That's exactly what should have been done here.
A former federal prosecutor, Nima Rahmani, telling CNN Based off these videos, both on the ground and from above, he doesn't think deadly force was lawful, since the vehicle is seen reversing and tires beginning to turn right, making it appear Good was trying to flee.
The ICE agent wants to prevent someone from fleeing. Well, the law is clear. You cannot shoot someone simply because they're fleeing.
But former FBI Special Agent Jonathan Gilliam and spokesperson for the National Police Association, Betsy Brantner-Smith, disagree. Gilliam telling Just the News, aiming the vehicle at the ICE agent standing in front of the hood is the same as aiming a gun. Brantner-Smith saying he likely thought he was going to be killed.
And they're trying to eliminate the threat, and in this case, the imminent threat was a woman behind the wheel who was obstructing ICE operations.
This is a situation where this ICE agent clearly was in fear of his life.
Former U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Virginia, John Fishwick, tells us, as the FBI accelerates its probe, the ultimate question they will work to answer is, did the ICE officer reasonably believe his life was in danger?
Courts and juries in this country give great deference to law enforcement when they have to make split-second decisions. But ultimately, that's what the FBI needs to determine and to release to the public.
Fishwick adding, most of the time, judges and juries do back law enforcement when facing these quick decisions, and it's not necessarily what could have been done better or what, looking back, they wish somebody had done.
What that officer had to do in the split second, and that will certainly favor this officer as the investigation moves forward.
Now, the Trump administration has been clear. Ramming a car is considered a weapon, and federal agents will use deadly force in order to stop that weapon. President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, among others, have called the shooting lawful self-defense, while local officials have dismissed that federal narrative. I'm Jeff Harris reporting from Washington.
DHS says a U.S. Border Patrol agent shot 2 people in Portland, Oregon, after they say the driver of a car attempted to run over federal officers. According to DHS, this was a targeted vehicle stop. The driver is believed to be a member of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. Agents identified themselves, and that's when the driver, they say, weaponized his vehicle. The White House is creating a new Assistant Attorney General position whose sole job is to investigate alleged fraud. It's in response to claims that child care centers in Minnesota were fraudulently taking federal funds meant for low-income families. Minnesota has long battled fraudsters in its social safety net programs and secured many convictions, but more allegations are coming in, claiming the vast majority of suspected fraudsters are Somali Americans. Federal officials have since frozen social safety net payments to multiple Democratic-led states they suspect of fraud.
A lot of people have asked, how are you really going to get to the heart of the fraud? We've been asking ourselves that question for the past couple of months, and we think this is the critical piece at the Department of Justice to really ramp this fraud investigation into high gear.
President Trump will appoint the candidate who will then have to be confirmed by the Senate. Vance says he expects the position to remain at least through Trump's term in the White House.
These great American companies can help rapidly rebuild Venezuela's dilapidated oil industry and bring millions of barrels of oil production to benefit the United States, the people of Venezuela, and the entire world.
President Trump meeting leaders from multiple oil companies Friday to discuss the next steps in restarting mass oil production in Venezuela. This is a second wave of attacks in Venezuela has been canceled following a surprise capture a week ago of Nicolas Maduro, who is now facing criminal charges, accused of funneling drugs and gangs into the U.S. as he begins his journey through the U.S. justice system. Continuing our coverage, let's dig into the scope of this massive military operation. It took the U.S. just 90 minutes to capture Maduro and his wife in an early surprise morning attack on Saturday, January 3rd. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane says President Trump signed off on the mission on Friday at 10:46 p.m.
The word integration does not explain the sheer complexity of such a mission. An extraction so precise, it involved more than 150 aircraft launching across the Western Hemisphere in close coordination, all coming together in time and place to layer effects for a single purpose: to get an interdiction force into downtown Caracas while maintaining the element of tactical surprise.
At 1:01 on Saturday morning, U.S. forces arrived at Maduro's compound. Ground forces were deployed to find the leader while helicopters providing air support came under fire. At 3:29 a.m., helicopters began withdrawing out of Venezuela. Then at 4:21 a.m., Trump announced Maduro's capture in a Truth Social post. Hours later, the president shared this photo of Maduro on board the USS Iwo Jima bound for New York. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will meet with foreign ministers from Denmark and Greenland next week for further discussions on the U.S. acquiring Greenland. This is the White House's announcement considers a range of options to take over the Arctic island, including using the force by U.S. military. Reuters reports that the administration is also considering paying Greenland residents $10,000 to $100,000 to encourage the territory to secede from Denmark and join the U.S. Meantime, President Trump has invited the Colombian president to the White House just days after threatening military strikes on the South American country. Trump changed his tone about his counterpart after he said they had a friendly phone call. And as we look ahead, Florida lawmakers will hold a special session in April to look at redrawing the state's congressional map. That's according to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Republicans hold 20 of Florida's 28 districts and are trying to gain 3 to 5 seats. It's all part of a nationwide redistricting push by both parties to try to improve their odds of winning elections. Taking a deeper dive into redistricting in the 2026 midterms, Republicans are targeting 9 Democratic House seats from new maps in 4 states that would give the GOP 3 more seats. For the Democrats, new maps in California and Utah could flip as many as 6 seats. And with the current narrow margin of 218 to 213, fewer seats could determine control of Congress next year. This is the balance of power for House Republicans recently got a bit narrower. California Representative Doug LaMalfa died at the age of 65, leaving a new vacancy. That's on top of Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's resignation. Her seat will be filled following a March special election. This puts the Republicans at 218 seats, Democrats at 213, and 4 vacant seats. The narrow margin makes things complicated for House Speaker Mike Johnson to pass legislation along strict party lines, only affording to lose 2 votes. Coming up next, we talk with former Caracas chief of station for the CIA, Rick De La Torre. He spent years gathering intelligence in the heart of Venezuela. His analysis and story next. Plus, fraud fallout grows even bigger. The state's looking at their own child care programs and policies in the wake of Minnesota fraud allegations. Continuing our coverage of U.S. military action in Venezuela, earlier this week I spoke with former Caracas chief of station for the CIA, Rick De La Torre, who spent years gathering intelligence in the heart of Venezuela. This is his analysis and story about Maduro's capture.
Rick, most Americans, they have not been on the ground. They have not been surveilling Maduro like you have. Tell us about what you witnessed of his regime.
Well, my time at the helm was during a period of time where Maduro was firmly entrenched, was running his criminal network over a number of years. His inner circle was just as guilty in so many of the things that we've now charged Maduro with. That is the human trafficking, the sale of drugs into the United States, the material support to terrorist organizations from Colombia within their borders. And then on the political front, his open door policy, red carpet treatment to our enemies, to include Hamas, Hezbollah, China, Russia, and in particular the Cuban intelligence apparatus that really terrorizes not just the Venezuelan people, but keeps them in place so that they could go ahead and take the oil that Venezuela produces and they could use it and profit off it. So we're talking about a guy who was a criminal in every sense of the word.
Well, you mentioned the intelligence community, and we've heard a lot about the military side of this operation over the weekend, but how much of a role would the intelligence community have played in the capture of Maduro, tracking his whereabouts?
Oh, very significant role. I mean, tracking his whereabouts is certainly a critical thing, right? You need to know where the target and the objective is before you can do anything. But it's more than that, too, right? You need to establish patterns of life. What time does he wake up? Where does he go? Where does he hang out? Who does he around? What happens on Tuesdays that doesn't happen on Fridays? So once you understand and baseline that information, then you could start to see those patterns and see how you could use them to your advantage. But like it was mentioned in the report, these are these are operations that take months and months of planning and practice, and it is really mind-boggling if you look at the man hours that go into this kind of work. But the result is the professionalism, the exceptional results of this operation that I think is probably going to go down in history as probably one of the greatest military operations ever conducted by our U.S. military.
Well, historic for so many reasons. I mean, not just considering the arrest, but the perp walk, even his comments today during his, initial appearance in court, maintaining that he is still president. What are you reading into the President Trump's comments about running Venezuela as it relates to oil infrastructure, which you touched on, and also Venezuela's capabilities on the ground? I mean, what needs to happen now?
Well, so obviously the security situation needs to be brought under control, and I think Venezuelans deserve to have some shred of peace and decency within their lives at home. That's one of the reasons I think why this administration took the criticized by many approach of allowing Delcy Rodriguez, who is just as guilty, just as much of a criminal, to remain in power for the short term, right? The concern there is obviously, yes, there is a very strong exile community. 1/3 of the entire population of Venezuela lives outside its borders. And if you look at the leaders of, the opposition leaders, all of them are currently in exile. So you need to run the country from day to day, and you need to do it right away. So you work with what you've got. And sadly, we've got to pinch our noses and work with Delcy Rodriguez for the time being.
Only have about 20 seconds. How does Maduro's capture influence China, Russia, and Iran? How do you see that playing out in the short term?
It's already starting to happen. They're realizing that the Western Hemisphere is basically off limits to them. They're starting to recalculate what they're going to do. I think the show of force also shows that we're serious and that they're going to have to go back to square one when it comes to their planning or considering of doing anything in Taiwan in particular. All the weapon systems that Maduro regime spent from China and Russia, they all failed. None of them worked.
Implications on a worldwide stage, something that we are closely watching. Former Caracas chief of station for the CIA, Rick De La Torre.
The fraud investigations in Minnesota are extensive, massive, and coming from all sides of the federal government. Earlier this week, Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team explained how it's not every day we see the feds take charge in fraud cases at the state level.
Multiple agencies involved here. Tell us more about their focus.
Yeah, most of the time state agencies are the ones who take this into their own hands, but it seems like the feds are stepping in at this point. So the White House sent out a press release that laid out 9 federal agencies working on various aspects of this whole thing. Obviously, at the center of this is the DOJ, which says it's running multiple active criminal investigations. The DOJ says it's filed criminal charges against nearly 100 defendants, issued thousands of subpoenas, executed search warrants, and interviewed more than 1,000 witnesses so far. Supporting those cases, though, is the FBI, which the admin says is surging forensic accountants, data analytics teams all into Minnesota to tackle this. The FBI is focusing more on healthcare and home care providers who are accused of billing for services that may not have just ever been provided.
On that point, it's not just about prosecutions, right? This is also an enforcement side of this. There's also a benefit side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, DHS says that hundreds of investigators are on the ground in Minnesota doing site visits, door-to-door checks at locations who are suspected of fraud. And as part of those efforts, DHS says it's identified more than 1,000 potential fraud findings and is reviewing some of those cases for also immigration issues. The Department of Health and Human Services also is targeting the money flow itself. They froze certain child care payments. They're requiring receipts and photo evidence for claims. So, like you said, all hands on deck.
All hands on deck, and much more to come on this. Emma, thank you.
Thanks.
Later on, Emma will be back to sift through how much taxpayers potentially could have lost at the hands of these Minnesota fraudsters. Coming up next, camera clash. A federal push could wipe out DC's traffic cameras. And from classroom to crops, the hands-on experience teaching students skills that could one day shape the future of agriculture. The National News Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we begin in Washington, D.C., where the Transportation Department reportedly wants to ban automated traffic cameras.
The camera that is given out the most is this one on southbound Kenilworth Avenue next to 295. 16,000 tickets since October. Some drivers say it's an example why they believe traffic enforcement cameras are about money, not safety. It's hard to argue this one protects pedestrians since they have their own bridge above it. And it's in an area where drivers leave a 50-mile-an-hour highway and the speed limit instantly drops to 25. At a time when traffic deaths are falling in D.C., Council Transportation Chair Charles Allen and other city leaders are upset after Politico reported that the U.S. DOT has come up with a plan to ban traffic enforcement cameras in the city.
What's your solution otherwise for how you hold dangerous drivers accountable?
In western North Carolina, Waynesville High School's $1 million teaching farm is nearly complete. The nearly 10-acre property offers students hands-on experience in handling animals, growing crops, and understanding the farming lifestyle.
And part of that farm with the grants that it got is it's supposed to be kind of a community hub so other schools can come visit, and it is a working farm so that if they don't have that at their school, they can come here and partake with our students.
Critical industry, the school says the farm should be ready by the summer. A major shakeup to what Americans eat coming up next, what these new guidelines may mean for your diet. Elon Musk's AI chatbot is under fire for allegedly producing sexually explicit images and in some cases child pornography. There have been many reported cases of Grok responding to user prompts to digitally undress people. Plus, the U.S. labor market ended last year with a whimper. According to government data, the economy added about 50,000 jobs in December. The unemployment rate dipped to 4.4% compared to 4.5% in November. That's partially due to the labor participation rate dropping. Also, former reality TV star Spencer Pratt has announced plans to run for mayor of L.A. after losing his home in the Palisades fire last year. In his newly launched Pratt for Mayor 2026 campaign, he says he plans to expose the system and demand accountability from leadership. Those stories and more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. The Trump administration releases a new food pyramid following the latest dietary policy announcement here behind me. The newly inverted pyramid places protein, dairy, fruits, and veggies at the top, while whole grains are at the bottom. It's a nod to a historic version first introduced in 1992. According to the USDA, the new guidelines put real food at the center of health in America. Health officials also urged Americans to drink less alcohol and restrict food with preservatives, artificial flavors, and dyes. Restoring stability coming up next. The Trump administration says it could have boots on the ground in a post-Maduro Venezuela if the security collapses. We hear from a veteran brigadier general. Plus, a global power play. President Trump's Venezuela plan to control oil sales could come at a hefty price. You're watching the National News Desk, America's News. Now, catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back. The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected. Fallout continues in the wake of widespread fraud allegations in Minnesota. Plus, the backlash against independent journalists covering hot-button topics including fraud and domestic terrorism. Then later, the defense strikes back. The disagreement on charges for Luigi Mangione as he tries to avoid the death penalty. From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News. Now, I'm Dee Dee Gatton. Thank you for joining us. Minnesota in focus this week as Governor Tim Walz ends his re-election bid over an alleged welfare fraud scandal. Our national correspondent Christine Frizzell reports from Capitol Hill, where Minnesota lawmakers were grilled this week on the allegations of widespread fraud and misuse of federal funds in the state.
Claims of taxpayer fraud in Minnesota front and center on Capitol Hill, where GOP lawmakers made their case the problem is widespread.
The fraudsters, many of whom are from Minnesota's Somali community, have stolen from programs meant to feed needy kids, provide services to autistic children, house low-income and disabled Americans.
The hearing called after this viral video in which conservative social media influencer Nick Shirley knocked on the doors of taxpayer-funded daycares and accused them of not operating.
Childcare center is locked.
Though many said he came outside of business hours or they didn't let him in because they didn't know who he was.
We're open Mondays through Thursdays, 2 to 10 p.m. He was here earlier. I don't see him right now.
Minnesota state representatives at the hearing today say they've been sounding alarm bells for years.
The Tim Walz administration has utterly failed to protect Minnesota taxpayers and vulnerable citizens, ignoring years of credible reports and retaliating against those who spoke up, often by claiming they were racist or Islamophobic.
They laid out examples from whistleblowers with the Minnesota Department of Human Services.
They revealed that retaliation now includes threats of being fired with cause, which means you do not get unemployment insurance in the state of Minnesota.
Their claims disputed by both Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison.
I've prosecuted and convicted over 300 people for Medicaid fraud since I've been the Attorney General. We're serious about convicting people for stealing money that is going or supposed to go to poor people.
Democrats accusing Republicans of ignoring fraud they say has been carried out by the Trump administration.
A $300 million ballroom, hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars spent at Trump-owned properties around the country, Trump-branded wine being sold at the Coast Guard exchanges, American taxpayer dollars being spent on DHS propaganda ads on Truth Social.
The Trump administration this week announced $10 billion in cuts to social services, including child care subsidies for 5 Democratic-run states, including Minnesota. I'm Christine Frizzell for the National News Desk.
Independent citizen journalist Nick Shirley, whose now viral video pushed the fraud story in Minnesota into the national spotlight, is also speaking out. He says he's received death threats for his reporting. One of the most well-known independent journalists who's faced similar threats and violence is Andy Ngo. He spoke exclusively with the National News Desk Jeff Harris, who has more.
Andy is widely known for his coverage of Antifa, drawing national attention in 2019 and 2021 after being beaten by Antifa protesters in Portland, Oregon, leading to a brain injury. He tells us the threats Shirley is facing usually get made not only when your work gets a lot of attention, but also when it's effective.
It's hitting on the nerves of people who don't want the story to be out there.
Senior editor for the Post Millennial, Andy Ngo has experienced threats and violence multiple times covering Antifa in Portland, Oregon. This video from 2019, Ngo being severely beaten and later hospitalized by masked Antifa protesters. Then 2 years later, he was recognized while covering a rally on the anniversary of George Floyd, chased through the street and again beaten.
One may be subjected to actual violence when one's work goes viral and gets a lot of attention.
In October of 2025, Ngo was among the few independent journalists invited to the White House for an Antifa roundtable. Those in attendance highlighting experiences of violence while reporting in the field, an event where he connected with Shirley, later passing along some advice.
I said that expect and prepare for really vicious backlash and potentially even threats.
Following this now viral video released in December showing Shirley knocking on the doors of taxpayer-funded daycares in Minnesota, alleging millions of dollars were funding vacant centers, despite many saying he came outside normal business hours, Shirley says those threats are pouring in.
They're saying, oh, like, kirked. You're going to be kirked.
You're going to be kirked.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah, like you're the next. You'll be the next Kirk.
Now, multiple lawmakers, politicians, and media personalities are also speaking out, publicly slamming and questioning Shirley's reporting.
This is what happens when they target communities for their own benefit. This is what happens when they scapegoat. And this is what happens when they no longer hide the idea of white supremacy.
Nick Shirley's reporting, there's no way that this kid walking around uncovered $100 million worth of fraud on his own.
But despite the backlash, the video has pushed the fraud story into the center of the national conversation, prompting Wednesday's House hearing on Capitol Hill and praise from some GOP lawmakers.
It's amazing to me that a 23-year-old journalist, a YouTuber, who's now got over 80 million views on this thing, found more in a matter of hours than Tim Walz and Keith Ellison, our Attorney General, have found in 7 years.
Now, no adding, he believes the criticisms being lobbied at Shirley and others like him aren't because the videos are lies or a hoax, but rather because they're portraying a community in a negative light.
So those type of criticisms are actually quite revealing.
Now, in an interview with conservative political activist Riley Gaines, Shirley also sharing that he would be exposing even more alleged fraud soon. His viral video has now been viewed more than 139 million times. I'm Jeff Harris reporting from Washington.
The TSA has flagged around $700 million in cash detected in passengers' luggage leaving the Minneapolis airport over the last 2 years. That's according to Homeland Security officials that spoke to the outlet Just the News. Officials said most of the cash detected involved a small number of money couriers of Somali descent who took routine routes to Dubai via Amsterdam. In 2025, Minneapolis travelers alone had nearly $350 million in their luggage. Officials said there wasn't much to be done as the couriers always had their paperwork in order. Fraud issues in Minnesota have gone far beyond just a few cases at this point. The White House is now calling it a fraud epidemic. Earlier this week, Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team broke down what they're saying. Multiple agencies have gotten involved, the DOJ, the FBI, DHS. There's still much more being done here.
Right.
Break that down for us.
Yeah, it seems like definitely all hands on deck at this point, especially from these federal agencies. So the Small Business Administration as well, they halted certain grant payments in Minnesota and suspended thousands of borrowers from federal loan programs over suspected fraud. Also, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they sent a team into Minnesota to investigate possible fraud in public housing and rental assistance programs. Department of Labor, they're reviewing the state's unemployment insurance system, and the Department of Ag even ordered Minnesota to recertify SNAP recipients to verify their eligibility, make sure they're following all these federal rules. So it's not just the DOJ and the FBI here.
Yeah, it's pouring into how this system
the whole
operates.
state works.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know that there have been different figures that have been thrown out. What are the latest estimates?
Yeah, that's where it gets a little bit confusing here because we've heard different things from different people. So $9 billion at least has been estimated to be the possible total fraud across multiple programs by federal prosecutors, but most of that is still under investigation. $250 million has been confirmed fraud tied to the Feeding Our Future pandemic meal scheme, and then hundreds of millions is the additional identified fraud in other program-specific schemes like the housing stuff, autism services, etc. All of these figures, though, vary widely, really based on the scope, the method, and whether the amounts are alleged, confirmed via conviction, or just estimated from these preliminary analyses.
And I think important to know, we are talking about Minnesota here, but there are international implications that are being investigated, contributing to that massive number. Emma, thank you. Thanks. For more on this Fact Check Team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code or visit thenationaldesk.com. The House passed a bill extending Affordable Care Act subsidies for 3 years. A discharge petition allowed Republicans to bypass House Speaker Mike Johnson's objections. The bill now goes to the Senate, where the pressure is on for a similar bipartisan compromise. Trump told NBC News that it could take fewer than 18 months to revive Venezuelan oil production, and then the oil companies would get reimbursed for their investment. The president said that Venezuela will turn over 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the U.S., then sell it at market value, with proceeds controlled by the U.S. Continuing our coverage, a retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General joined us on the National News Desk to discuss how removing Maduro impacts foreign policy.
I think it starts with realizing why this matters to the United States. And there are two primary reasons. Number one, Venezuela has been at the nexus of all of the problems in the Western Hemisphere for several decades. And number two, they have been a safe haven for America's enemies in our own backyard. And when you talk about specifically deterrence, that's stopping the adversary from doing the things you don't want them to do. And it hinges on strength of capability and strength of will. And we no doubt demonstrated both of those on Friday night, similarly to the way that we did so in Iran in June. And that helps our adversaries realize that we are serious in capability and will, and they must not do those things that we do not want them to do.
Right. And we also know Maduro wasn't a one-man operation. I mean, he was part of this narco state with generals, judges, cartels in place there. So how hard is it to dismantle the system, especially when you have these regime holdovers still controlling security forces there on the ground?
Jan, you won't see the American Armada in the Caribbean go away anytime soon because it provides a very real presence and threats that if anybody tries to undermine U.S. interests and currently Rodriguez as the leader of Venezuela, then the United States will act. And just our presence there and the demonstrated capability from Friday should keep those elements in check. But we'll be watching closely how Rodriguez is doing in her governance of Venezuela to make sure that it's aligned with our interests and ultimately the interest of the Venezuelan people.
Right, because the president hasn't ruled out boots on the ground if there is a security collapse under her, right? So what's your thoughts on that? What does that look like?
It's not going to happen anytime soon. There are a couple of markers of things that would need to happen before we would actually do that. Number one, we would start to see Rodriguez backtrack from support from the United States or of U.S. interest. We're not going to likely see that. We want to keep an eye on making sure that there aren't loyalists to Maduro, like the Interior Minister or the Defense Minister, that try to replace her. And then the president has promised that there was a phase 2 of strikes that he didn't use on Friday night that would likely be used against large-scale activity in the defense industry in Venezuela that would act against U.S. interests. And that still remains on the shelf as an active plan. And we would implement that type of phase 2 strike before we would ever start thinking about boots on the ground.
All right, that's actually very good information there. Now, some look at history and point to Panama or, Iraq as a model for perhaps what we should and should not repeat, although every situation and every country is still very different. How would you advise the president right now, and what lessons have we learned from past operations?
Jan, one of the biggest ones is that you don't want to dismantle a functioning government. So now that Maduro is gone and Rodriguez is in power temporarily, you want to make sure that the government continues to function and you don't purge major elements of the government so that there is not a power vacuum in the country. And we're doing that well. But the other piece of it that we haven't talked about enough is quickly establishing the duly elected government in Venezuela. They had elections in 2024. Massively popular leaders like Gonzalez in exile in Spain and the Nobel Peace Prize winner Machado won that election. Let's not linger and allow Rodriguez to be a long-term figure. Let's use her as a transitional figure and get those very popular figures in place as quickly as possible so that you've got a mandate of support from Venezuela and likely the international community as well.
Yeah, and finally, there's this economic element, right? Because controlling oil revenue, sanctions relief, and access to global markets also very critical moving forward. So what does success look like a year from now if all goes well, and what will you be closely watching?
Jan, we need to make sure that there's this quick transition of governments from Rodriguez to the popularly elected government of Gonzalez and Machado. And then we need to keep an eye on stability factors, security factors, and economic factors to make sure that they are flourishing and that we are purging those negative elements of the government that have caused it to be the nexus of problems in the Western Hemisphere and that safe haven for adversaries of America in the region.
All right, General, we appreciate your insight at this historic moment. Really, some of the hardest decisions are being made right now. Thank you also for serving our country.
It's my privilege. Thanks for having me.
New details, Luigi Mangione, the man charged with killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in 2024, was in court Friday for pretrial hearings over the potential death penalty. Mangione's attorneys want the judge to drop the charge of murder through use of a firearm, which carries the death penalty. The defense and prosecution disagree on a technical interpretation of the statute. Mangione's attorneys also want the judge to throw out a firearms charge. So to come, our team of correspondents breaks down the top headlines this week in Washington, from the massive Minnesota fraud investigation to the consequences Nicolas Maduro faces.
And welcome back to the National News Desk. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, and our team of correspondents reports on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. The Minnesota Social Services fraud scandal, which has cost taxpayers billions of dollars, took center stage on Capitol Hill this past week. National correspondent Christine Frizzau, this is a scandal that has been a decade in the making. What are politicians saying about why it's continued for so long?
Yeah, Stephen, first we should say a lot of these are still fraud allegations. The video, now seen more than 100 million times from that conservative social media influencer Nick Shirley, raises a lot of questions about whether daycare centers largely run by Somali Americans were receiving taxpayer money but not actually operating. Now, in reality, some of those daycare centers said that this conservative influencer came outside of business hours, or, they didn't come to the door because they didn't know who he was and there were children outside. However, there is a long history of these daycare centers having a lot of issues, either not passing health and safety inspections or frankly being found to be doing what they're accused of, which is taking taxpayer money from the government, but not actually having kids there, at least not for a full day. So we learned a lot more, not only about these investigations, but that they date back, like you said, Steve, more than a decade, and that a lot of times when concerns were raised, that they were either ignored or even buried.
Why would Governor Walz let $9 billion in fraud occur? Mr. Hudson.
In my opinion, because it was politically beneficial to Democrats. Again, the Somali community is a huge constituency group.
Now, we should say, Minnesota has the largest population of Somali Americans in the country. But since this has come into the spotlight, President Trump's administration has pulled millions of dollars in funding for all child care services and other services in the state as well. So there are warnings that this is, really going to negatively impact families and small businesses. A lot of people that President Trump promised to help. We are going to be keeping a close eye on how this all plays out in the next few weeks.
National correspondent Christine Frizzau, thank you. Meanwhile, it's been a week since the military removed ousted Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro from his home to face drug trafficking and weapons charges here in the U.S. The U.S. Senate taking a surprising big step this past week to limit President Trump's future use of military force in Venezuela. National correspondent Audra Elnishar, tell us more about that.
Yeah. Steve, Thursday morning, we saw 5 Senate Republicans joining Democrats to advance a measure requiring Trump to get approval from Congress before any future military action in Venezuela. But this is just the beginning for this measure. More votes are going to be needed to get it all the way past Congress. Meanwhile, in his efforts to, quote unquote, run Venezuela, we're learning that President Trump is telling the Venezuelan government to cut ties with America's adversaries. Here's what Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Jim Risch told us.
The president expects that that's going to happen. There have been discussions, not a lot of it reported, but there have been a lot of backdoor discussions, not only between the president and the Secretary of State, but a lot of U.S. officials with officials in Venezuela, indicating to Venezuela what they're going to have to do.
Now, of course, when you think America's adversaries, you think China, our biggest economic and military adversary or competitor. And Venezuelan oil, I should say, the bulk of it goes to China. China's the top destination for Venezuelan oil. So Trump's moves in Venezuela here are the biggest challenge to Beijing's influence in the region in recent memory. It's an open question, though, how much losing grip in Venezuela will actually impact China's broader interests, aka how much does the CCP even care about being in Venezuela at this point, or if they trust that their ties are so strong this won't be impacted. Risch also told us that Venezuela is, quote unquote, small potatoes for China. Not to say that this is insignificant, but we'll be watching to see if China responds to this with something other than statements in support of Venezuela.
National correspondents Audra Elnishar, Christine Frizzau, great reporting as always. Thank you both, as always, for your hard work. Thanks, and back to you.
Coming up, the airline that is about to become the 4th global airline in the U.S. through a newly announced deal. Plus, dealership desperation, the thousands of technician jobs unfilled, what the shortage means for your next repair. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. We are taking the pulse of America, and we start in Washington State with a major expansion of Alaska Airlines.
Here it is, the Alaska Airlines global livery.
Alaska Airlines international flights will now sport a Pacific Northwest livery inspired by the Aurora Borealis.
We call it a paint job in Wisconsin.
Alaska Airlines has placed the largest aircraft order in its history, agreeing to buy 105 Boeing 737-10 jets and 5 Boeing 787-10 wide-bodies.
We are creating the fourth global airline in our country to compete against the big three.
The deal means a major expansion of Alaska's travel destinations with a plan to cross oceans out of its operations hub in the Seattle area.
Ford Motor Company has 5,000 open auto technician position at its U.S. dealership. CEO Jim Farley calling it a sign that we're in trouble in our country. If positions don't get filled, auto expert and Northwood University professor Tim Nash says Americans could feel the consequences.
The price that people are paying to have their car serviced is a lot higher than it would be. You know, it's simple supply and demand in action. We've got to get those people employed and in the market.
Farley says top-tier experienced technicians can earn up to $120,000 a year at Ford, and the company still can't hire.
Friends, family, and former patients of Dr. Janelle Green-Smith holding vigil in her honor.
It meant everything to me for people to come out, share stories about her legacy, how it was to work with her, the impact that she personally had on their lives.
Smith is remembered for her passion for women's health care and fighting for change.
She was very down to earth, passionate about health care, especially mothers-to-be. You know, that was her passion. She really wanted to highlight what it's like to be a woman of color and, pregnant.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say hundreds of women die each year during pregnancy or within a year after giving birth.
Still ahead here on the National News Desk, a historic first when the U.S. population is predicted to shrink. The U.S. population is expected to begin shrinking for the first time ever by 2056 due to low birth rates and reduced immigration. The Congressional Budget Office predicts an increase from 349 million this year to 364 million 30 years from now, but a drop after that. By 2030, CBO estimates the annual death rate will outpace births due to dropping fertility rates, with growth driven mostly by immigration. This could negatively affect the economy. That'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National News Desk, America's News. Now, don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National News Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton here in Washington, and from all of us here, have a great week.